Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. My family has owned a 60-acre farm just outside of town for over 100 years. It's nothing fancy, just some fields, a small barn, and a little farmhouse. But it's been in our family for generations. My parents worked that land their whole lives and raised me and my siblings there. Some of my best childhood memories were helping my dad feed the chickens and riding on the tractor with my mom. When I got older, I moved away for college and a job in the city, but the farm was still dear to my heart. I'd visit often to help my aging parents with whatever needed to be done. We always talked about how one day I'd move back and take over the farm. Well, about 5 years ago, I finally made that move back home. My parents were getting too old for the day-to-day farm work, and my job in the city had me burnt out. Moving back to the farm felt right. My plan was to start small, just grow some crops to sell at the local farmer's market until I got the hang of things. Then someday take over all the land and have a full working farm again. Things were going well until about a year ago when I got a knock on my door from a man named Philip. He introduced himself as the president of the Oak Hills Homeowners Association. I had heard of them. They were the neighborhood right outside the farm property. Upscale houses selling for way more than I could ever afford. Philip explained that the homeowners associations had plans to expand into my family's farmland. Since my property bordered their neighborhood, they wanted me to join the homeowners associations. That way, they could have jurisdiction over my land for their expansion plans. I politely declined his offer, explaining that this farm had been in my family for generations, and I had no intention of handing control over to an homeowners associations. Philip seemed annoyed but told me to think it over. A few weeks later, I got a letter from a lawyer representing the homeowners associations. It said if I didn't join in the next 30 days, they would find a way to acquire my family's land, whether I agreed or not. I tore up the letter, pissed that they thought they could intimidate me into giving up my family's legacy. Over the next few weeks, Philip and his homeowners association's cronies kept showing up at my door, repeatedly pressuring me to reconsider. They used every tactic imaginable: flattery, money offers, veiled threats. But I refused to budge. This was my family's land, and there was no way I would let some entitled homeowners associations take it from us. Things came to a head one Saturday morning when I was out fixing a fence in the south field. A line of bulldozers came rumbling up the dirt road alongside my property. Figuring it was some kind of homeowners association's intimidation tactic, I hopped in my truck and sped over to where they were halted at the property line. Philip stepped out of a Range Rover with a smug grin on his face. He announced that they were there to start grading the land in preparation for building the new phase of homeowners association's homes. I lost it on him, screaming that he had no right to invade my family's property. He laughed in my face and said it wasn't my land anymore. Fuming with anger, I jumped back in my truck and raced to my parents' house where I knew they kept all the property records. I grabbed the deed and any other documentation I could get my hands on. At the county clerk's office, I was able to get certified copies made, proving ownership of the land. Back at the farm, the bulldozers were rumbling across the south field, tearing up the fence I had just fixed. I drove straight at them, forcing the vehicles to stop. The drivers looked ready to fight me when Philip and his lawyer stepped out of the Range Rover. I shoved the property records in their faces, telling them to take their equipment and get the hell off my land. The lawyer took one look at the deed and ownership records and realized they were screwed. Philip's smug grin had vanished. He looked around anxiously as I told him I would be suing him personally and the entire homeowners associations for illegally trespassing and property damage. Within an hour, the bulldozers were retreating back up the dirt road. I spent the next several weeks repairing the torn-up fence line and meeting with my lawyer to build an airtight case against the homeowners associations. In the end, we settled out of court, but not before I made sure the homeowners associations paid dearly for trying to steal my family's legacy. With the lawsuit winnings, I was able to completely renovate the farmhouse and upgrade all the old equipment and facilities in preparation of taking over full operations someday. My parents were so proud of me for standing up to the homeowners association's bullies. This farm meant everything to our family, and I was willing to fight as hard as necessary to defend it. Philip got booted from the Homeowners Association's president position, and they completely scrapped the plans to expand. The farm has been nice and peaceful again. I can't say it was fun having to deal with entitled jerks trying to take our land, but the whole ordeal just made this place even more special to me. It reminded me that the memories and roots are much deeper than any shallow homeowners associations. This land has been in my family for generations, and that's never going to change. The next one is a pro-revenge story, so this happened about 1.5 years ago, but I recently heard the news on how far my revenge went. I was a Navy enlisted service member and was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan for a few years before I got transferred back stateside. I worked in the main hospital that cared for service members and their beneficiaries. It's a small hospital, so everyone knows everyone. Shortly after I left, I caught wind of a new physician officer working in the radiology department. My friends would say he's horrible to work with, but that's nothing new. However, someone saw him print a letter and he left it on his desk, and took a picture of it and sent it to me. He's requesting to move from enlisted housing to officer. Edit. Found out it's not a private letter. He did actually send it to housing, and most of housing is run by enlisted members. For context, military housing is available for those who are married, have a family, or are qualified based on their rank and depending on the military base itself. Typically, officer housing is much nicer than the enlisted. In Yokosuka, housing is basically the same all around because it's overseas. But most of the housing is apartments, and each apartment complex is called a tower. For example, Fuji Tower. There are 9 towers and 2 are for officers, since enlisted members outnumber officers by a lot. Now, one thing about the military, crap happens. When getting stationed, it is the active duty member's responsibility to either apply for housing on or off base before arriving, depending on what is allowed. If there is limited space, and you don't apply for housing on time, then you get put where there is space. So our new officer got placed in an enlisted tower. Mind you, enlisted members have families of their own, and other officers have been placed in enlisted housing before without an issue. Here are some quotes from his letter. And yes, this guy has a PhD. I have many valid objections to living in a building of almost all enlisted, and even many lower enlisted being an officer. There is a lot of crime, violent actions, drug use, and alcoholism that happens in enlisted housing. There are also sexual assaults and other perverts. I have a good-looking family, a wife, and 2 daughters, aged 3 and 4. They are prime targets to be victims of these enlisted deviant activities. My family should be safe in housing with officers. Officers are much more respectable, and these types of deviant activities are incredibly rare compared to the deviant activities of enlisted being commonplace. Other officer families will not want to visit us because our family lives in enlisted housing. My children need to make friends with other officer children. My wife needs to make friends with other officers' wives. I need to make friends with other officers. Forcing an officer to live in a large apartment building with almost all enlisted is unethical. You get the idea. This guy basically looks down on all enlisted service members, assuming every single one is a drug user, pervert, pedo, criminal, etc. The kicker, he was an enlisted army member before going to officer school. In civilian terms, think of a manager that discriminates and calls all of his subordinates criminals, violent, alcoholics, pervs, drug users, etc., based on your job position, forgetting that some have a family and, maybe aren't any of those things.
And he not only has the authority to ruin your work life, he can ruin your personal life. Deny days off, make you stay late, write you up if he doesn't like you, and not letting you promote.
Safe to say, everyone was pissed, and I have nothing to lose. I was separating soon and figured I'd have some fun before I get out. I created a burner Facebook account and posted the letter and the officer's picture on a popular military enlisted group page. Within 2 days, it spread like wildfire. But I wasn't done yet. The military has something called challenge coins. Think of trading cards, but custom coins that come in many shapes and sizes. I designed one with his face and a big middle finger on the back. On top of that, I designed stickers to show how proud US deviants are. Other coin designs came from other people as well, but so far I think mine was more popular. I sold over 70 coins to the initial person who originally sent me the picture at a huge discounted price so she can sell them for a profit for herself. So the officer's face is everywhere because most people keep their coins displayed on their desk. No matter where the officer went at work, he would see his face on someone's desk. And since it didn't have his name on the coin, can't officially say it's him. I sold more stateside, and even some got sent to Europe. I made about 3K overall, which was nice. The story even got featured on the online naval newspaper and on 2 popular YouTube channels. And if you're military, you know the only time big military cares is when it's too big to sweep under the rug. This story got the officer sent up to captain's mast, which is like Navy court. He tried to say his wife was the one that wrote the letter, but no one is buying it because her writing style is way worse. She even tried to take the fall, but no one believed her. They both ended up deleting all social media. Due to this, he got served 3 UCMJ articles, which basically are his offenses, but there's more. When you're in the military, you have a deadline on how long you can be a certain rank. If you don't pick up, then you're kicked out. And because he's new and got served UCMJ articles, he won't be up for promotion and therefore was involuntarily separated. Also, the officer program he went through pays for his PhD. When the military pays for your PhD, you have to serve 10 years to pay them back. If you don't complete 10 years, you have to pay the military back with money instead of time. So he lost his job and now has to pay back the military for his PhD, and since it takes a while for the paperwork to have him and his family sent back stateside, you can bet he socially suffered because no one worked with him. The next one is a petty revenge story. I was young, maybe 15 years old or so, and would pick up the odd babysitting gig for extra money. I took a night for a household that was on my paper route. They asked me to be there on a Saturday at 8:30, and I arrived a few minutes early. The parents were still getting ready, and they asked me to watch the kids while they prepared to head out. They left the house at about 9:15. Before they headed out, the wife gave me some very specific instructions. I could have a snack, 2 Oreos on the counter, nothing else. She said she poured a glass of milk for me and left it in the fridge. It was right next to the plastic milk jug with a piece of tape on it showing the level. She told me she'd check it when she got back, and if I took any extra milk, I would have to answer for it. The kids were okay, went to bed without any fuss, and the parents returned home at 12:20. Mommy paid me for 3 hours about 10 minutes after they arrived. Excuse me, but this isn't right. I got here before 8:30, and it's now almost 12:30. That's 4 hours, not 3. We didn't leave until 9:15, and we got home at 12:15. I'm only paying you for 3 hours. But I was watching the kids from 8:30. That doesn't matter. We were home, and you weren't in charge. We were. I took the money and rode my bike home. A couple of weeks later, they did pretty much the same thing. 2 things are important. First, the wife was a neat freak. I'm guessing now she had OCD. Everything was lined up perfectly. One of the kids spilled his drink, and I was looking for some paper towels. The cleaning supplies under the sink were perfectly lined up. Same with the pantry. Every jar and can was in a row with the label facing directly to the front. Second, this was in the mid-1970s, and all canned food had paper labels. So, the third time they called me in to babysit, they were late leaving again, and I knew that I was going to get shortchanged for the time I was there. I was steaming. So I went into the pantry and tore the labels off each and every can, all of them. She had a shelf for Campbell's soups, another for canned veggies, another for canned fruits, and I scrambled the unlabeled cans. When they got home, sure enough, wifey tried to shortchange me. You know what? Keep your money. I don't want it, and I am never babysitting for you again. And as of today, I'm stopping delivering your newspapers as well, so if you want to read the paper, you're going to have to go buy it at a corner store. I stormed out. I wish I could have seen the expression on her face when she opened the pantry door and saw shelf after shelf of bare metal cans. The next one is a malicious compliance story. When I was in university, one class had a weekly assignment, which was a 1-page essay that was mandatory to pass, but only worth 1% of the final mark per weekly essay. So they made up 10% of the total mark in a 10-week semester. Each week, I'd put in a lot of effort, and no matter what, I would get a mark of 9/10, which equates to 0.9% of the 1% mark. This went on for about 6 weeks. I thought it was a little odd that it was always the same mark, and I was frustrated I didn't get full marks because they were basic questions and I answered perfectly, but that's beside the point of the story. Anyway, my record thus far was perfect. I was a model student, never late, perfect work, etc. Now, in week 7, I had a family emergency. I could not complete my essay and asked for a one-day extension. Given my record, I didn't envision an issue with this, but surprisingly, the teacher denied my request and told me that if I didn't submit it, I'd fail the course. Alrighty then. So I dealt with the said emergency, albeit late. I opened my Word document, wrote half a sentence, then typed some gibberish that looked like an error code, and copied and pasted it down the page. Then I uploaded the essay online. You said I needed to submit my essay. Here it is. What I fully expected to happen was that the teacher would contact me and say there was an error uploading my document and to please resubmit it. This would have been the next day since it was late at night when I submitted it, and so I would have time to do it properly, which is what would have happened had she granted me the extension in the first place. What happened instead was I heard nothing. Then I got my grade. 9/10. What I figured out is that my teacher must not have even been reading our essays. She was probably marking us based on our previous assignment grades and just copying and pasting the grade each week. The worst thing is I couldn't report her because that would have meant confessing to submitting an incomplete essay. Needless to say, for the last 3 weeks, I put minimal effort into my essays and lo and behold, continued my streak of 9/10. The next one is an entitled people story. I, 25M, have been working since I was 16, and my first ever job was one I know many people share: McDonald's. Anyone who's worked there, even for the shortest amount of time, undoubtedly has stories, myself included. This one is definitely in my top 3 most ridiculous, and I've been racking my brain trying to figure out which to tell on these subreddits. I was probably about 17 when this happened, and at the time, I was doing opening shifts on weekends. The location I worked in was located just beyond a golf country club that catered to the local retirement community, so every morning we would see the same group of older people, more or less. One regular, we'll call him Ed, I served almost every time I opened the store, and his order was very simple, and one I've never been able to forget because of this: sausage biscuit and at least 8 grape jelly packets. Ed was a big guy. He had a hard time even getting in the door some mornings, as he was always out of breath just making the trip from his car, and I would guess he was only in his mid-60 SS. Otherwise, a very standard older gentleman with the exception of his medical alert bracelet, which I had noticed many times before, as his was particularly elaborate. I didn't really notice when he was gone for a while, if I'm being honest. He wasn't an everyday sort of regular, and we weren't even on conversational terms beyond the customer service script of "Hi, bye, have a good day." However, the next time I saw him, he was in bad enough shape that even I had to ask him if he was all right. He was wheezing just coming up to the counter and coughing whenever he spoke, and I got the gist that he had just been in the hospital. I knew what he wanted, so I just told him I got it and not to worry about saying it, but before he could pay, a woman rushed in from outside and started talking a mile a minute. It's pretty clear she's his wife, and definitely of the trophy variety. Big hair, nice manicure, sparkly jewelry, at least a decade younger, if not more. She's frantic, begging him not to get his breakfast sandwich and pleading with me not to serve him. It's super awkward, and I end up asking my manager what to do, and she says we can't refuse service because someone else says to. So I apologize, and Ed gets his food while his wife is nearly in tears telling me he's had heart issues, I think surgery as well, but I don't recall, and the doctor said he can't have any sort of cholesterol or fast food because his arteries can't take it anymore. All I could really do was apologize and leave it to Ed to try and console her, which he did not. He honestly just sort of ignored her until she went back outside. She came in on her own after that several times, begging us not to serve her husband. I felt for her. It was obvious Ed was killing himself slowly with his lack of regard for his diet, if everything she said was true. Unfortunately, there was nothing we could do, and every time I asked, I was told it wasn't up to us to police the customers' diets. It became increasingly tense serving Ed as he never seemed to improve with his breathing, and eventually he and his wife just stopped coming. The morning crew noticed and hoped he had taken his wife's advice at long last. But no. One morning his wife comes back, alone. She's stone-faced, cold, and before I can greet her, she slams his medical alert bracelet down on the counter and just opens the floodgates on my poor teenage ass. I mean, full-on shouting at me that I had killed her husband. The way she said it was like I had strangled him with my own 2 hands and got some sort of enjoyment out of watching his slow decline. I was pretty stunned and just apologized and handed her over to our manager to escape to the back. No way was I sitting through a whole tirade basically accusing me of first-degree murder. When I came back, my manager was stressed, but the woman had left at last. Apparently, she made all sorts of demands, wanting corporate's number so she could sue us for causing Ed's heart to give out with our food and never even trying to stop him. She was especially pissed at me for refusing to stop serving him and wanted all kinds of information on me, which my manager firmly refused, and her tears and anger made me feel truly culpable. We never saw her again after that for as long as I worked there. As far as I know, nothing came of her lawsuit threats, and I eventually moved on to a different, less customer service-oriented job because I had grown to hate people even more than when I started. To Ed, aka Sausage Biscuit Guy, rest in peace, and I hope there's plenty of grape jelly wherever you ended up. I try to be glad your wife loved you enough to go full Karen over your passing, but now I'm burdened with the small, unshakable fact that I did, however unintentionally, play some part in enabling you to your end. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.